This is a how to study lecture video for Biology 1440, especially for my course, Carafit's Bio 1440. I, of course, am Professor Carafit, and today's lecture is based on some of my advice, as well as advice and some slides that I've borrowed from and modified from Dr. Kelly Hogan at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who does a lot of research on how students learn, and then she modifies her teaching practices to enhance student learning, and I think she has a lot of important things to say. Biology 1440 can be a difficult course for some. It is a passable course. It's not impossibly hard, but it can be a shock if you're not used to studying hard, and if you didn't have to study much in high school. So, what can we do? Start right now, early on in the semester, with good, consistent study habits. And that's going to be 2 to 3 hours of studying per hour in lecture. So that's about 9 hours a week just for Bio 1 studying. So extrapolate that out for all of your credit hours, and you'll see that if you're a full-time student, you're going to need to spend a large amount of time each week studying to succeed. And that's how we learn. We need to spend time with the material outside of the classroom. One important thing to note is studying is not just reading your notes. That's sort of step one. Taking notes while you're reading your book, taking notes and fleshing them out then in lecture, and then looking over them is important, but that's how you start the study process. You want to test yourself, find gaps in your own knowledge, and then fill them in. And you want to do that before exam day, because an exam might find those gaps in your knowledge for you. So one way to do that, for example, is just to pretend you're a teacher and teach somebody, or teach your dog or your pillow or whatever a concept like you're lecturing, and then when you get to the part where you go and you forget how that works, that's a knowledge gap. Try to find those before the test finds them for you. Write your own exam questions. That will make you think about the topic critically, and then if you get into a group, you can share questions with each other and you can teach each other. You can also make concept maps and other study aids to help you along the way that are more active ways of preparing for an exam. You want to be active when preparing for an exam. And like I said in class, you don't practice for a basketball game by watching a basketball game on TV. You might watch a game to see how other players do things, but you actually have to get out there and practice. So practice for an exam by answering questions, by making drawings, by writing out things without the help of your notes. That is imperative if you want to succeed in this course. And all the while, get rid of distractions, because we are not as good at multitasking as we think. It's going to reduce your effectiveness and increase the amount of time needed to study if your phone is on, if your TV is on, etc., while you're trying to study. And people sometimes learn in different ways, and usually in combinations of ways, but there are different learning styles that some people react to better than others. Some of us learn better by hearing, so you may want to read the book into your phone then listen to it. Or maybe you're a visual learner and you learn better by drawing and looking at pictures. Maybe you learn by doing things, and so one way to take advantage of that is to study while moving, maybe on a treadmill or walking around, or while even just standing up can trigger that part of your brain to help you retain information better. Alright, so once again I want to thank Dr. Kelly Hogan. You can check out her website. She has a lot of papers on that I use to guide my own teaching as I'm trying to improve, trying to increase student understanding in the classroom by not just lecturing at you all the time. There's a reason that I lecture the way I do, and that every year I do less and less talking and have you do more and more things in the classroom, because it's shown to increase student abilities to retain information. So, we're doing this right here on a video rather than in class, so I guess we won't discuss it with a partner, but this is data from a study on how students learn best. And notice that there's a list of things, and what do we normally do in a college lecture? What are you used to? What do most of us get used to in high school? And that is, we read, of course, and then we attend lecture, right? and maybe we watch a movie every once in a while. We go to lab and we might get a demonstration, and then we might actually get to practice certain techniques in lab, right? But what helps us to actually retain information so we can pass those exams? These are, if we look at this graph, we're going to be making a lot of figures in Bio 1. Here we have our x-axis, which is where these labels will go. And then here we have the average retention rate. How much of the information did the students retain in their minds after leaving that class? Well, you might be able to think about it for a second. You know, pause this video, figure out where you think each of these labels should go on this graph. What we see is that in reality, lecture, very, very low, the lowest one on the graph. That's why it's probably not a good idea for me just to talk to you the whole time. Students usually don't like it when I make them get into groups and work on projects in lecture, but this is why I do it, because lecture is a terrible way for you to learn. Reading is not very good either, so we're going to have to figure out why we do some lecture and why we read. I'll explain why we do both of these in just a minute. Audiovisual, demonstration, discussion, this is some of the stuff I hope to do more of in lecture. Students are sometimes uncomfortable with it, but look at how much more effective it is than straight lecture. Practice, that's some of the stuff we do in lab. That's you doing questions outside of the classroom. That's you doing mastering biology. That's you making your own concept maps. And then if you practice teaching it in a group, that increases things dramatically. So think about things you can do to take advantage outside of the classroom of these higher order retention rates. How could you practice practicing problems and teaching outside of the class so when you come to take the exam you have a lot of retention? So why do I bother having you read? Why do I have you lecture? Well, first of all, we can increase these bars by actively doing these things, by reading actively, filling out guiding reading questions. So when you're reading, you're also practicing. And in lecture, we're giving you some of the basic vocabulary so that you can eventually discuss and practice. It's sort of the foundation. It's not good enough just to come to lecture and then take the test. You need to read and do lecture and then discuss, practice, and then if possible teach each other in a group to increase your retention rate and do well in the course. It's a lot of work. That's why I say it takes 2 to 3 hours of work for every hour you spend in the classroom. So passive reading is not studying. Don't just stare at your book. You'll forget everything that you read. That is what the active reading guide, I also call it well, I call it active learning guide and also guided reading questions. So I haven't really picked a definite title for it, so forgive me if you get confused when I refer to it as two different things. But the active learning guide is there to get you to actively read, and then the important thing then is that you read the book, you fill out those questions, then I don't have to lecture on all of that little stuff because you've read it before class. You know the definition of words. So we don't have to waste time in class defining words. We can get into the difficult stuff that you really need help with, and then we can work together on it, so lecture will actually be far more fulfilling than if I'm just up there defining what a mitochondrion is. So actively read, answer those questions. You can also have a notebook out and start writing your own notes while you're reading. Pretend you're a teacher. What would you write down to get ready to teach? So rereading your book or restudying your notes creates illusions of knowing because you recognize things in your notes and you go, I can do that, yeah, I know that, I know that. But when the exam's in front of you, you really don't know that. So one of the most common phrases uttered in introductory biology, I really knew it, but I don't know what happened on the exam, or I totally blanked out. That's because you really didn't know it. You didn't study the right way to solidify it in your head. Now, one really cool thing to think about, and studies show this, it's not how many times you listen or reread information, it's the number of times you attempt to retrieve it that makes it stick in your mind. And how do you retrieve it? You put your notes away, you shut your book, you answer questions, or you get a blank piece of paper and try to draw things without help, and you see how far you get before you realize what you don't know. You find those knowledge gaps. So try to retrieve information. Don't just stare at your notes and get a false sense of knowledge. So what we're doing here in class in lecture, one of the things we do in lecture that helps you to succeed when you're studying outside of classes, we're building a conceptual framework. So think of all the facts that you're learning in your active learning guide or your guided reading as these books, okay? Those are the facts. In lecture, I help you to figure out where they belong and how they fit together. We're building the shelf for the books. That will then help you when you're studying outside of class to put everything together and to get ready for that exam. So lecture has a very important role. It's for me as the expert in the room to help you see how things fit together. But it's up to you to really start learning the individual pieces of information. I can't make you learn. You have to do the learning. The person who learns in the classroom is the one doing the most work. So if I'm doing all the work, you're not learning anything. So how can we build this framework? Listen to an expert. That's my job. Read a book written by an expert and read it actively while asking questions and taking good notes. So they're passive ways to learn, but they build a framework. But be careful having the illusion of knowing just because the book was well organized, you think you understand it. Can you organize it on your own? Can you put things together? Do you know how things fit together without the help of that book being open or your notes being open? Don't be satisfied with thinking you know it. You need evidence that you know it. Be a scientist about your own learning. Don't accept things on faith. You know, I'm pretty sure I know this. No, prove it to yourself that you know it. You need evidence. Answer questions. Draw it out. Teach it. You need your own evidence that you know this information before the exam. One way to do this is to start with the big picture. It's called the Google Earth method. You're looking down at the planet from above and you zoom in. For example, let's say you're learning about meiosis. The big picture, so we might be describing what meiosis is and how gametes form. And then you might get more specific. So it's like you're zooming in on Google Earth. Then you answer more specific questions and more specific questions. And then you get to super important fine details like drawing every stage of meiosis. So test yourself at different levels of depth or be able to explain different levels of depth for these topics. The big picture and then the fine picture, the zoomed in picture. You can also compare and contrast things. Just get out a blank piece of paper and start writing out how meiosis 1 and meiosis 2 are compared. How these different terms. So you might a lot of people have flashcards, right? Well, you might pick 2 terms that are similar from your flashcards and then write out how they're similar and how they're different. How compare and contrast those terminologies. That'll help you to learn them deeper. Because a lot of students think that studying for science is about just learning words, but you have to be able to apply this information. And you can't do that unless you've thought about things very deeply. Another way to do this is to make concept maps. You list out all the words you can think of from the chapter, let's say, or from lecture, and you connect them with lines, or with, well, I should say with connector words, so some sort of verb usually. You can practice that with something simple and then get more complicated. You can Google it and see lots of examples of concept maps online. But here's an example of a concept map with a scientific method. So here's the terms in boxes, and they have arrows with action verbs or action statements linking them together. Scientific method is used to solve a scientific question. A hypothesis predicts the answer to a scientific question. You can see how all of these things fit together. So this looks like work, right? It is work. But what is it? It's deep, deep studying. You have to really think about things to build this. And building it is just as important as using it to study after you build it. Building it is studying. So take advantage of things like this, especially if you're a visual learner and a tactile learner. Building these things will help you to make sense out of all of that stuff we learned from the different chapters. Another thing you could do, maybe you're an artist, maybe you love different colors, and things like this will help you to learn. Now, we're not studying this exact topic in Bio 2, but this is from a talk by Dr. Hogan again, and I want you to just see how well organized these are. Now, these are probably not notes the student took in class. They probably took notes in class that were a lot messier and then sat down and reorganized them into this awesome drawing that will help them to study for the exam. So I said don't accept your knowledge on, just faith. You need evidence, and figuring out what you don't know is the hardest part. Once you know what you don't know, finding the answers is usually pretty easy. You have a book, you have an instructor. You have TAs, you have supplemental instructors. You have all kinds of ways to get help in this course. Here's how I recommend. You get a blank piece of paper in your brain and a pencil. And when you start explaining things, drawing things, and when you get stuck, that's when you know you got to go back and restudy that topic. And that helps you to try to recall information, which means you learn it much deeper than if you just skim your notes over and over again. So here's some tips on thriving in Bio 1, just some things that I want to say. Read the assigned book, complete the reading questions, which is the active learning guide, while you read the book. Granted, there are more questions for each topic than you'll be able to answer for one lecture. So let's say some of our lectures take up a whole week on a certain chapter, so you might do half the guided reading questions for the first lecture and then save the other half for the Thursday lecture, or the depending on how your class is broken up. If you have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday lecture and that topic is going to be covered all week, break up the guided reading questions accordingly, and don't try to do them all in one night. So then also come to lecture with your completed questions, so you can type them out, you can have them written out, you can have them saved online and access them with your phone, but I'm not going to collect them. These are not questions that I collect. Your active learning guide is not something that I look at. It's there to get you ready for lecture and get you ready. I'm going to ask you questions, and I'm going to assume you've done them, and I might not talk about topics that were covered in those questions. I might only skim over some of them because I don't need to define all of those things. You've already done that part for yourself. So we have time in lecture to do deeper learning than just learn definitions and things like that. But I do expect you to be ready to answer questions. I might have clicker questions based on some of the guided readings. It'll be evident if you're not doing the reading pretty quickly when you're working in groups and you're the one who doesn't know what's going on, right? And I advise that you review your notes within 24 hours of taking them. That helps you to retain the information without having to study even harder. So evidence shows if you review notes from class within 24 hours, it helps them to stick in your mind. Then, use all kinds of different strategies to learn the materials throughout the semester. Do not cram for this course. So start making concept maps, start making flashcards, start rewriting notes if you need to, start doing all these things to help yourself learn. So group study, teach each other, make your own exams and take those exams, compare notes, come to my office hours, go to tutoring, go to SI sessions, find your knowledge gaps, and then come, if you can't figure out how to fill those knowledge gaps, come get help. Make your own quizzes in mastering biology, create those concept maps like I said. Do everything you can to be ready for that exam. Don't let the exam catch you off guard. It's better to take an exam and go, wow, I overstudied for that, than to say, I had no idea it would be that difficult. So get studying now. When we do take exams, remember, high school focuses mostly on remembering. All right? So that's like understanding. That's just explain, what does this word mean, right? But in college biology, we're going to start focusing on understanding, applying, analyzing, things like that, all the way up to creating in some cases. That is when you're asked to, let's say you learned how an organelle in the cell works. On the exam, there could be a question that you've never seen before. It might say, a patient has the following symptoms. What organelle is malfunctioning? Well, you can say, well, you never taught us that. Well, yes, I did. I told you what the organelle does. If you know it thoroughly, you can then figure out what the symptoms would be if that organelle is failing. So don't just rely on remembering facts. You will be tested on several levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and your mastering questions and clicker questions and discussion questions are there to help you start thinking this way, so that you're used to it. If you're paying attention, you're used to it when the exam comes, so it's not a total surprise. So, final tips from Professor Kerafit today. Read your book before coming to lecture, but read it actively, doing those active learning guide questions. Complete that learning guide before lecture, and remember that you don't have to complete every question for a chapter on the first day of lecture for that chapter. In the summer you do, because we do whole chapters every day, but during the fall and spring we break the chapters up over several days usually. So break up the questions. Do the mastering assignment after you've done the reading, and leave yourself plenty of time to do the mastering assignment. Don't do it the day it's due. Do it early if possible. Come to class and be ready to discuss your answers to your active learning guide. I'm not going to cover them all. I'm not going to cover them every day, but they're there to get you ready once again, so I don't have to lecture over the simple stuff. You can do that on your own, no problem. Take good notes in class. Don't just stare at me. Take good notes. And you can even start those notes before class by making outlines of your reading. Then, outside of class, review those notes within 24 hours. Test yourself. Test yourself a lot. Go beyond notes. Go beyond flashcards. Do concept maps. Write your own questions. Start drawing. Start writing out, like pretend you're lecturing, and write out your lecture notes. What would you say to a class if you were going to teach this information? And remember, there's a lot of work involved, but it's not too hard. You can do it. Everyone has the power to do this if you apply yourself and learn from your mistakes and don't give up. All right. We're going to have a good semester, and I will see you in class.